treated when they need care and treatment from our health service. One of these momentous events was the repeal by the people of Ireland of Article 33.3 of Bunreacht na hÉireann, the removal by the people that was of the constitutional ban on abortion. We in Labour can be proud that we have long campaigned for this. We've been against it, resolutely against it, right back in 1983 when it was first put into the Constitution. And the outcome of that referendum showed that the people were no longer willing to tolerate a measure in their constitution that was so dangerous for women, that impacted on their health, sometimes their very lives, and that was so backward and undemocratic. Comrades, we put that behind us in May in a hugely decisive vote of the people of Ireland. What we haven't put behind us are some of the attitudes and the obstacles that still prevail for women in our health services. Because the second momentous event this year, or series of events this year, also touching very much on women's health and about how women are treated, concerned cervical cancer. That controversy showed that while we may have progressed, and we have progressed in so many ways in this country, we have a long, long way to go in others. Much of what we have learned this year has been deeply disturbing and deeply troubling, and it calls for decisive action. To frame our discussion on this topic, we're going to talk in a few minutes to a number of remarkable people, individuals who by their bravery and their tenacity have brought these issues squarely before the Irish people. And you'll have seen one of our guests, Vicky Phelan, receiving an award yesterday in Waterford, but we thought that we too, as a party, would like to honour her and her colleagues, and I'll come to that shortly, just in a few minutes, and we'll talk about an award that we would like to make. But I'm first joined by Sinead Ahern, who is the outgoing chair of Labour Women, known to you all. Give her a big welcome. And Sinead, I want to ask you, first of all, just about the award itself, because Labour Women have this award, the Joe Cox Award, named after the UK Labour, the murdered MP in Britain. Just tell us a little about the award itself and what it is.
I suppose Jo Cox was an extraordinary activist throughout her life. She showed an amazing commitment to speaking out for people who are vulnerable throughout her entire career, both as an activist, as chair of the UK Labour Women's Network, and later as an MP. And I suppose what we wanted to do with this award was not only to continue the memory of Jo's work and to keep her spirit with us, but also as a way of honouring some of the absolutely extraordinary activism that we see here in Ireland. And we use it as an opportunity to highlight the work of people that we feel have made an absolutely outstanding and exemplary commitment to activism, to improving the lives of others in their community. And that's why we've conceived of this award, so I'm delighted to be here today to present it.
And really, there could not be more deserving recipients of this award than our guests this morning. Two of the three that we were hoping to have with us, we're delighted to have Vicky Phelan and Stephen Teep, ladies and gentlemen. Before we do that, let me also. I'm going to ask you to do that again now in a moment. We're also joined by Alan Kelly, TD, our spokesman on health, this morning, who's also obviously been very active, very closely active in this entire issue during the year. But before we do that, and you beat me to it with your round of applause, and I'm not surprised because I think the individuals that we're talking about here have been, so celebrated across the country. As I said, most recently yesterday in Waterford, in Vicky's case, I saw Stephen on the television last weekend, a very moving, a very compelling interview about his experience. And we know that the experiences of individuals are really the way that we understand difficult and complex questions that face us all as a community. And the experience that they have related in such an articulate way and in such a compelling way, I think has really moved many, many people in this country. So what I'm going to ask Sinead, before I talk to our guests, what I'm going to ask Sinead to present the Joe Cox Award and to ask you to acknowledge once again your recognition of these great people.
Thank you. Sorry. That way. Thank you so much for everything you've done. It's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything you've done, Vicky. You've been absolutely incredible.
Sit. Okay.
Welcome.
Vicky, I'm going to ask you first of all. As I mentioned, the sideboard at home might be heaving at this stage with awards that you've very deservedly had from around the country. This room is full of political people who've joined a political party because they feel motivated to change the country, change the world that they live in. They decide to get involved in politics. But in your case, I suppose in Stephen's case and Lorraine's case, and Lorraine Walsh, we're hoping that Lorraine might join us. In fact, I was told a few minutes ago her plane was on the tarmac in Shannon Airport, so she's very much invited. We're hoping to have her here, and if she does, perhaps she can join us. But in all of your cases, you didn't really choose activism, or no. Activism chose you. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I was never even involved in politics in college. I was more the sporty type back in college, and I was the book nerd, as he calls me. And I never would have, I suppose if somebody had told me 6 months ago I'd be doing this, I'd have laughed probably, really. I said, not a hope. I wouldn't be, if I had thought I'd be sitting up on a stage talking to a room full of people, politicians, I think I'd have laughed you out of the room, So it's not something that I would have selected, no more than yourself, I'd say, no. Stephen, but, I suppose I felt compelled once I came out with my story. And at the stage, when my court case happened, I only knew that there were 10 other women. That was as many as I knew that there were. We now know there's far more than 221 even. But once I broke my story, I suppose there's no other way for me to describe it except to say that I felt compelled that I had to keep doing this, and I will keep doing it until we get more accountability, change. I have a 13-year-old daughter. She just had her first dose of the HPV vaccine a couple of weeks ago. And I suppose I was driven all along by the fact that I thought I was going to die. So, there's nothing better than a death sentence, really, to make you want to make sure things happen, and you really don't care what you have to do to achieve that. So that was my reason. Because
that's an interesting point, because you do it out of a motivation that comes from within yourself in terms of your own dilemma. But the really striking thing, and it comes out in the Scally report, which he says about you, and it's very compelling in the Scally report, that actually, and I'll ask Stephen about this as well, and I think people will praise you in terms of the approach, the fact that you've been willing to go so public, having previously been such private people, I would assume. But it's the selflessness of it, I think, that people are really admire. So you've got to look after yourself, your own health, your own family, your own future. And this is kind of where it becomes political, maybe with a small p. It's the really compelling thing about it is how selfless, because you want to actually do it for others rather than just for yourself. And it comes through in Scally very strongly.
I suppose it comes from my background. I work in education, and I work in adult education, and I suppose I've just transferred working with people who, were failed by our education system, because I work with adult learners, to transferring that to working with people who have been failed by our health system. So, I have a history, I suppose, of working with people who don't have a voice and who haven't been able to use that, and I can. So, I've just transferred that to a different agenda, really, I suppose, on a bigger scale than I ever imagined.
Sure. One of the things that Lorraine Walsh said was, it really stuck with me, a quote from her where she said, "I can't change the past, but I can change the future."
Yeah.
And again, it's like we would see that as very much a kind of a political sort of motivation that we would have on a broader level, that we see things that are wrong, we want to try and change it for other people in the future. So, Stephen, how's it been for you? As I said, I saw you on the television last weekend. I'm sure a lot of people did, in a really strong interview, very obviously personal as well, but also the motivation that we're talking about here of let's make it better and let's ensure it doesn't happen again.
Well, that's what it's all about for me. It's about, I suppose, from the very beginning, it's about trying to explain a story to two small guys when they're old enough to understand. When Irene passed away, my two little boys were 4 and 2. They're 5 and 3 today. they're nowhere near old enough to understand why their mother died. But when they are of age, it's going to be a different story, because now we've been dragged into this scandal. The story will be, you know, explaining what happened to their mother, but it's going to be about everything that I suppose Vicky blew open in regards to everything we know now today with what went on. But the question that's always going to be asked of me when I do explain it to these boys, because I'm the one raising them, they will be asking questions like I do, will be, what did you do about it when you found out about this scandal? There's two options: do nothing or do something, and that's where, for me, there was only one answer to that question: do something. It is, of course, finding out the answers of what went wrong, making people accountable where we can. But I think the most common thread between Vicky, I, and myself, Lorraine, and many of the other families in this is repairing what did go wrong, so this doesn't happen to anybody else like it happened to us.
Yeah.
I do not want to see another widower like myself on stage.
And on that score, I think you both welcomed the Scally report. And actually, I sat down and read the report during the week, and it really is worth reading as a report, you know, beginning to end. I'm not a scientist, or most of us wouldn't understand some of the technical detail in there, but it repays reading the report, because it's a chronicle of what happened. And the recommendations are so strong. I think you both said that, perhaps with some understandable skepticism maybe at the outset in terms of reports. We've seen so many reports. But this is a report with real content to it, isn't it, in terms of the recommendations?
Like, I think what we were expecting was this report just to be a list of problems, and that's it. And that was the fear. I think we were both, Lorraine as well, when we first sat down with Gabriel and went through it, like, pleasantly surprised that not only did it list out the problems, but it listed out 50 recommendations as well, some of which will instantly improve the screening programme today. And that's what we need to achieve. It's about reinstalling trust back into this screening programme, but of course highlighting the mistakes while also fixing them. And to see those 50 recommendations straight away gave us something to now work towards achieving, and that's implementing them sooner rather than later.
And Alan, I'm sure you would agree that those recommendations, from the political perspective now, in the coming period, that's where this is at, is the implementation of those recommendations.
Absolutely. The most important thing, and you know, obviously I speak with the lads a lot, Steve and Vicky and many others, but the most important thing is we will eventually have to find answers as to what happened, but it's all about the future. What is so inspiring, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, about the two individuals to my right is everything they do, they're doing for future generations. It's all about the 50 recommendations. It's all about the implementation. It's all about future vaccination. It's all about future screening. It's all about the advent, which we in the Labour Party are very strong on, in relation to HPV vaccination, in relation to HPV testing. It's all about the future. It's about the extension to boys, so we can create herd immunity. And that's why these are two amazing people, so deserving of this award, because all their campaigning is all for the future generations, and that's why they're such inspirational people.
Sure. And just lastly, Vicky, obviously we remember Emma Vic Fahuna as well this morning, and she obviously passed away during the summer and would have also have been very prominent in all of this. I made the point at the start, when we were opening up, that we're talking about women's health. So we're talking about it on the broader canvas of women's health. Cervical cancer is one hugely important. The Scally report strikes me, it opens up that broader agenda of women's health. How women are treated, attitudes towards women, obstacles that women have, particular social economic impact on women more than on men for a lot of things in our broader society. Would you agree with that? That Scally kind of, he deals with cervical cancer, but he makes it into a bigger set of questions for all of us.
Yeah, he does, absolutely. And I think that's something that I have been very vocal about from the very beginning, which is why I was so, open and quite graphic at times, I suppose, about, what cervical cancer actually means when you're living with it and the type of side effects that you have. that, you know, a lot of the medical profession just kind of expect you to get along with. You know, one of the biggest side effects that, you know, a lot of women are very embarrassed to talk about are the psychosexual side effects. I mean, up to 50% of marriages break down as a result of cervical cancer because, you know, it's very difficult to you know, enjoy sex again, basically, after a cervical cancer diagnosis. You go into early menopause, you know, and this is happening to very young women. And a lot of these side effects are really brushed over when you finish your treatment. You know, they focus on really, you know, the chemotherapy, the radiation, and, you know, coming back every 3 to 6 months for checkups. But they really don't go into the emotional and the psychological impact that the cancer has had on your life. And I think that is, to me, tends to be the way women are treated in general with regard to their gynecological health in this country. So I suppose I felt when I started talking about this more openly on radio and in interviews that it gave voice to women who were afraid to do so. So I think the more we do that, you know, the better we will be for it, and the more change will come about as a result of it.
Okay, in a moment, Aoife Ní-Shúilleabháin is going to pick up on some of those issues with our Labour colleagues, but I just want to thank you once again, Vicky, Stephen, Alan, Sinead, for joining us. Give them all a great welcome. Aoife. Aoife.
Thank you, Alex, and congratulations to Stephen, Vicky and Lorraine, who's not with us right now. I have Mark Murphy, who's beside me right here now. Dr. Mark Murphy, I'm going to give you a chance to come in on some of the issues that we discussed, but I know that you want to talk about women's access to healthcare.
Thanks, Aoife. So I'm really struck by a theme that we have to think about the past, but we must be future and solution focused. And I think this year is all about women's healthcare. This is the year in May where we repealed the 8th Amendment, and Labour had such a huge part in that movement over 30 years. That's a huge harm that the state inflicted on Irish women, and we've removed that, and we have to think about the future. We've seen this year with the cervical check controversy and some of the words used and described in the Scally report. It's not good enough, and we have to be future focused. And I think I am part of a medical profession that have failed women in the past, and we all need to step up, and we are committed to providing a women-centred service in the future. So in terms of abortion care, it's 5 months since the referendum, and it's 2 months until a world-class abortion service was promised for Irish women, and I don't think actions are happening fast enough. We need to implement this service. We need to legislate. We need to remove those restrictive words that have been coming and sneaking into the legislation. And we need to support providers. I'm going to be providing abortion services, and I want to do that in 2 months' time. And we need to support those healthcare providers. And in terms of cervical cancer, we've heard just the wonderful advocacy from Vicky and Stephen. We need to extend the HPV vaccine to boys. It's a no-brainer. HICWA have agreed to that. And I would say cervical cancer is such a serious condition, and it's really important that the women of Ireland, once you become 25, you need to register with cervical check and go to your practice nurse and GP and get screened. I would also say that in terms of access to healthcare, women have a hard deal. In terms of accessing general practice, over half the population have to pay for primary care and general practice. That's not right. And women are disproportionately affected. They require contraception. There are issues to do with reproductive and sexual health care, the menstrual cycle, and they will have to attend general practice, and they have to pay to see me, and that's not right. It's not right. And when they're seeking access to secondary care, there are some other gynecological malignancies, like ovarian cancer. And to pick up ovarian cancer, we need early diagnosis. I need access to ultrasound scans, and that's not there. So there are major challenges, but we are solution focused and future focused, and we need to think about that, what type of public service that we can deliver, and particularly for women's healthcare, because we've really failed in the past, and we have to be mindful of that past.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go to Councillor Deirdre Kingston. I know that you had a council motion on breastfeeding that you wanted to speak to us about.
Yes, well, I had a motion to Dún Laoghaire County Council in terms of supports for parents, really, and supporting new parents in the workplace, particularly in the council. And it was basically to bring in further supports for breastfeeding, you know, if you have to breastfeed in the workplace, that there is an area that you can go to, and that there would be just some support measures brought in for counsellors that are new parents, because unfortunately there is no leave for counsellors who become new parents. So you're expected to turn up to your meeting, even if it's the night, you know, that the day that you have your baby, you're expected at a meeting that night. So I think that needs to change in legislation, but while we're waiting for that, we need councils to acknowledge that parents need a little bit more support.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Deirdre. And we are going to hand over to Alex now.
Okay, Sinead, the folks there have been talking just about what the lessons are for what we've learned during the year. Labour Women, as I say, we have this policy statement and policy document. What are the priorities? And we'll stick with the cervical cancer because that's our focus just for the moment. But what, in addition to that, are the kind of priorities that Labour Women believes that the party should be campaigning on in this area?
I think that's probably where the Labour Party policy is maybe different to what might be proposed by other parties, in that we're talking about well-being and respect. So we're talking about health, not just in the context of access to medical care, high-class facilities, which are all very, very important, but also a healthcare system that's founded on respect. Respect for people's information, respect for sharing that information, respect for people's autonomy around making decisions around healthcare, and also around well-being. So understanding that mental health services, physical health services are very, very important, but they're important in the context of a well society, a society where people have decent jobs, decent accommodation, that they're not stressed out wondering where the next meal is coming from. So it's really about that. It's about respect at its core, and improving services with that basis.
And Stephen, bringing it back to your experience and Irene's experience, that would seem to resonate, that point about respect. That was something that you were looking for, and you were looking for respect and recognition for your position.
Yeah, like I think when it comes to that, I suppose the conversation around disclosure and the information that Irene had asked for many times, you know, she said I'd done everything right, I'd gotten my smears done, how wasn't this picked up? Never was it once said, you know, that information we can find out for you and we can share with you. In fact, they got the information before she passed away and made the decision to withhold that information from her. Not only withhold it from her, but 3 months after Irene passed away, they made a second decision, and that was to withhold that information from myself also. The biggest, I suppose, the most painful thing about that is how they disrespected Irene, particularly after almost 2 years of fighting, 2 years of basically handing her life over to the system, to those healthcare professions, to those consultants. We were in awe of them. We thought they were the greatest people there was, and then for them to turn around and disrespect my wife in the way that they did is one of the, I suppose, things in this that makes me most angry, particularly when it's written in black and white what to do if someone is so sick or even dying. If your information comes to light, that the policy is there in black and white and it was just blatantly ignored. In the words of Irene's consultant, I dropped the ball. That's not good enough. It just isn't.
So, what you're saying there is that it's as much about keeping to the protocols and keeping to the policies as it is about having new ones.
Absolutely. You know, as a doctor pointed out to me, you know, medicine isn't an exact science. That's why they say they practice medicine. It should be a two-way street. Transparency between both parties. It's almost like a partnership. And it's all about respect is at the core of this, along with trust. And yeah, it's very important. Very, very important.
Well, I mean, half the problem was the policy at the time was voluntary open disclosure, you know what I mean? And obviously a lot of the medical professionals, particularly in the case of the cervical check, women, you know, decided for themselves who needed to be told and who didn't. I mean, in my case, I found out, my gynecologist did tell me, but it took him 15 months to, you know, of wrangling over and back emails between himself and the director of cervical check about who was going to tell me. because he didn't want to and she didn't want to, but they took 15 months to decide that. But she wanted him to tell 3 of the 10 women that were in his care, and he decided, in fairness to him, to tell all 10. But, those decisions should not be left up to individuals. There's a policy there, it should be adhered to. That's why we're really adamant about making sure that this mandatory open disclosure policy is implemented to the nth degree and that there are sanctions on individual health practitioners.
I'm just struck one of the points that Scally makes is, and maybe it's a good point to end on, he talks about the need to engage and enable the public to take an active interest in their own health, making healthy choices and building healthy communities. And he says that's essential to achieving public health goals, as well as contributing to socially sustainable health systems that reduce health inequities. So what you're talking about in terms of the respect and the importance of disclosure, particularly in the case of women. There would be issues in the case of men as well, but particularly in the case of women in the situation that you've described, that's actually at the heart of it. So the respect has to go both ways, and engagement and people being agents about their own health, they still do need the support and the backup of the system itself.
Yeah.
So once again, folks, will you thank our guests for being with us this morning? I should have asked you, Vicky, how are you? You're obviously well. Yeah, that's good. I can see
Yesterday's makeup is still
on. We can all see that. Yeah. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Hey!
Now, Aoife,